Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're digging into a big question. What happens when a super successful business partnership just completely implodes?
And this isn't just any old disagreement. We're talking about a corporate divorce, a massive $66 million argument over pricing, and a legal showdown that actually split Singapore's highest court. Okay, let's get into it.
So, our story revolves around the Samwo Group, a really successful private construction firm in Singapore. For years, everything looked great on the outside. The founding families, the shareholders, they were all building this incredible business together. But, as you can probably guess, behind the scenes, things were starting to crack.
Now, look at this. This chart tells you almost everything you need to know about the power dynamic here. You've got one group, the majority, holding almost 72% of the company. And then you have the minority, with just over 28%. After years of tension building up, the trust between them just completely evaporated. It got to the point where working together was basically impossible.
So, the minority shareholders, feeling like they were being sidelined and treated unfairly, decided to make a big move. They filed a lawsuit against the majority. And they used a really powerful piece of Singapore's company law that's specifically designed to protect minority shareholders from being, oppressed by the people in charge.
Now, just when you think this is all headed for a huge, messy trial, the whole thing takes a really interesting detour. Instead of dragging each other through the mud to prove who was right and who was wrong, they decided to just skip the blame game entirely. And they did this with something called a consent order. What is that? Well, it's basically a formal, legally binding truce. Both sides agreed to stop fighting about certain things, and the court makes it official. In this case, they agreed to stop arguing over whether any oppression actually happened.
And this is where it gets fascinating. Here's the deal they struck. The majority admitted absolutely no guilt. Both sides agreed, okay, we're done. One of us has to buy out the other. But here's the kicker. Both of them wanted to be the buyer. So they left it up to the court to decide who buys and who sells, and they agreed an independent expert would figure out the price.
This whole arrangement created a massive legal puzzle. Think about it. Usually, the court sets a price based on who was wronged. But if there's no official good guy or bad guy here, how on earth do you decide what's a fair price? The whole idea was suddenly up for grabs.
In the end, the court decided the majority would buy out the minority. But that didn't stop the fight. Oh no, it just kicked off a brand new one, this time over the price tag, and it was even bigger than the first.
Yeah, the stakes were huge. An independent valuer looked at the books and said, look, at full value, the minority's piece of the pie is worth about $66 million. The entire fight now was about whether they would actually get that full amount.
So it all boiled down to this. The majority said, hey, we're buying a minority stake. It doesn't come with control, so the price should be discounted. But the minority fired back, no way, we're being forced out, we deserve every single penny of the full value. And their whole argument really came down to two tricky financial ideas. Okay, the first one is the discount for lack of control. The logic here is actually pretty simple. A single slice of pizza is less valuable to a buyer than the whole pizza, right? Because with one slice, you don't get to decide the toppings. It's the same with shares. A small block of shares that doesn't give you control over the company's decisions is worth less, so it gets a discount. Then there's the second one, the discount for lack of marketability. See, shares in a private company aren't like stocks you can just sell with a click of a button. It's hard to find a buyer, and there are often rules about who you can sell to. That difficulty, that lack of a ready market, also pushes the value down.
So this whole mess goes all the way up to Singapore's highest court, the Court of Appeal. And they couldn't agree. It was a split decision. So first, let's look at the logic from the two judges who were in the majority.
This quote right here is the absolute heart of their decision. What they're saying is, look, just because a court tells you to sell your shares, that doesn't automatically make you an unwilling seller, especially not when you voluntarily agreed to the process that led to the sale. So let's trace their logic. It's a pretty clear four-step path. First, they said the court was only involved because the two parties agreed it should be, through that consent order. Second, they argued that to be considered a truly unwilling seller, you have to actually prove you were wronged. Third, and this is the key, since the minority agreed to a process where selling was a possible outcome, the law sees them as a willing seller. And that leads to the conclusion number 4. In a regular sale between willing parties, these kinds of discounts are just business as usual, so the discounts apply.
But one judge saw things completely differently. He wrote a really powerful dissent that focused less on the technical legal labels and more on what was actually happening in the real world.
For the dissenting judge, this was the North Star.
It wasn't about whether someone was technically willing or unwilling. The most important thing was to find a solution that was fundamentally fair, just, and equitable for both sides, given their specific situation.
And this chart shows his key point perfectly. Look at the benefit the majority was getting. Before the buyout, they had a lot of control, almost 72%. But after the buyout, they had 100%. And crucially, they crossed that 75% threshold. That's kind of the magic number in corporate law that lets you do pretty much whatever you want, like change the company's core rules.
So the dissenting judge's argument was this. The majority wasn't just buying shares. They were buying total, absolute control. That is a huge strategic win. So to let them get that massive prize and get a discount on the price, well, from his perspective, that was just fundamentally unfair. If you get full control, you should pay the full price.
Okay, so that's the legal drama. But beyond all the lawyers and the millions of dollars, what are the real lessons here? What does this mean for anyone who owns or works in a private company?
Well, there are some really crucial takeaways. First, these no-fault buyout deals can be a double-edged sword. They stop the fighting, sure, but they open up a whole new can of worms when it comes to valuation. Second, and this one is huge, if you agree to a process that could end with you selling, the law might label you a willing seller, even if you feel anything but. Third, that label can cost you a fortune because it's the legal green light for applying discounts that can slash millions off your share value. Fourth, your best weapon against those discounts is to prove the buyer is getting a real, tangible benefit, like crossing that 75% control line. And finally, here's the most practical tip of all. If you are ever drawing up one of these buyout agreements, spell out exactly how discounts will be handled. Do not leave it ambiguous for a court to decide later on.
You know, at the end of the day, this whole case leaves us with a really tough question that even the judges couldn't agree on. When a business falls apart, what should guide the outcome? Should it be strict technical legal principles about who's a willing seller? Or should it be a more gut-level practical sense of what's actually fair in the real world? It's a question with no easy answer.